Hello, I'm Anthony. Welcome to the basic guide to quantizing in Cubase. The process of quantizing is all about moving notes. When we record something, we very rarely record it absolutely perfectly. And we use quantizing in Cubase to help us move those notes to where they need to be. I'm going to show you how to do that today. Hope you enjoy the video. And if you do, check out the Patreon and channel member links below. It's an awesome way to help support my channel. And an enormous thanks to everybody who's signed up so far. It means a great deal to me. Okay, let's make a start. I'm going to record a quick melody now, and I'll use that to demonstrate quantizing. Here we go. I just looped around there. I'll just delete that little C. Okay then, let's zoom in as far as we can. And you can see that none of the notes are absolutely perfect. You can also see this grid in the background showing us kind of guidelines as to where we think those notes are likely to be. That's your quantization grid. In the status bar at the top of the editor window, we have our quantization settings, and you can see it's currently set to 16ths. If I change that to 8ths, you'll see the number of grid lines go down. Now we're going to start off with 16ths today. It's by far the most common of all of the quantize options. Now it's worth taking a moment to consider what this 1/16th means, because it's potentially very confusing. It is not 1/16th of a bar. It happens to be 1/16th of a bar because our current time signature is 4/4. That's a complete coincidence. A 1/16th note is an absolute fixed length. Now it's beyond today's topic to get too deep down this rabbit hole, but I am going to point you at the preferences. And in the MIDI section, you can see this line here that says display resolution 1/16th equals 120 ticks. That's telling you actually how long a 1/16th note is. The tick is the smallest measurement of time in Cubase, and 120 of them occupy 1/16th. If I change my time signature to 3/4, now we no longer have 16 of those segments. You see these little segments? There are no longer 16 of them inside the bar, there are only 12. Now the vast majority of songs are in 4/4, so very often these things do align, but they are different. Okay, so here we have our quantization set at 1/16th. I'm now going to press Q on the keyboard, which is the shortcut key to execute the quantizing operation. Watch what happens to all of these notes. So all of the notes have just snapped to that quantization grid. I can press Ctrl Z to undo that operation, and they've all gone back to their original state. Now there's a pretty deep philosophical issue at hand here as to whether or not perfect is perfect in the case of music. If I re-quantize those notes, I'll just press Q again and play it. Everything is going to be absolutely perfect. Let's listen to it. And that's a problem. Human beings aren't perfect. In fact, for the vast majority of recorded history, humans haven't been able to record notes this perfectly. Only in the past 30 years, really, have we acquired the ability to quantize notes, on a mass market basis. And so almost all of the music you've ever heard up until modern times hasn't been quantized. What this means is you need to be very careful about presuming that everything can be quantized absolutely to the grid and will always sound good. And we're going to have a look today at some means that we can mitigate that process and make sure that it doesn't quite sound so robotic. But just for the time being, we are going to deal with the simple maths of it, and we'll add that extra layer of complexity on a little bit later. So all of that was quantized to 1/16th, and as when I played it back, you heard that all of the notes were played properly. I'm going to undo again to get back to our original state. This time I'm going to quantize to 8ths, which means that each one of those quantization zones is twice as big. When I quantize the notes this time, watch the ones that were played quite quickly at the end of the phrase. Well, actually, there's going to be one note that's affected by this. The F3 is nowhere near either of the quantization lines. When I press quantize now, something's gone pretty badly wrong. That's not what I intended at all. It's very important when quantizing to understand the context of the notes that you're quantizing. You can't apply a quantization grid that's too abstract, that's too diffuse. Otherwise, you're going to end up with this situation where notes get moved too far. Cubase does not care how far away this note is from the quantization line. it's going to snap it all the way to the nearest one. And it just so happened that it was closer to 10.3 than it was to 10.35, which is kind of halfway through this beat. Now, as is usually the case with the inner depths of Cubase, if you dig far enough, you can find ways to mitigate these problems. I'm just going to press this little E button that says Open Quantize Panel. There's a feature inside here called Catch Range and Safe Range. That's beyond today's topic. That's quite an advanced subject. But just to kind of bring your attention to the fact that it is possible to set up quantize patterns that would ignore these notes that are an absolute mile away from the grid. We're trying to keep things simple today, so we're going to set it back to the quantized grid that it should be, which is 1/16. It's possible to automate a large part of the quantization process in Cubase so that basically everything happens automatically, and there are a couple of different means by which that can happen. I'm going to move this MIDI part out of the way, and I'm going to record a new part, but this time I'm going to engage Auto Quantize on the record. It's in the transport bar. We have automatic MIDI record quantize down at the bottom of the screen. I'm going to engage that, press record. Now, as soon as I press stop, you can see that those notes have already been recorded. The moment they hit Cubase, they're implicitly quantized, and they have actually been permanently recorded that way. I can't actually access the original kind of timing of the notes that I recorded, and that's why I don't like it. I think that's too much. There's another option as well. Let's get rid of those and bring the original MIDI part back. If I select the event editor below again, I can now engage Auto Apply Quantize. Let's turn that on. Now, that's not quite the same as automatically recording. What's happening here is that the quantize panel is reacting immediately to all of the settings in its own panel. So if I change the grid type, for instance, to 1/8, watch this note that we talked about a little bit earlier. It will automatically jump to comply with these requirements. So Auto Apply Quantize isn't to do with the recording per se, it's to do with these current options. I don't personally like either of those features, and so we'll revert back to complete manual control. You can see it's left this note behind when I disengage Auto Apply. I can undo, however, to get my note back. Let's undo all of the quantization on this part as well, just Control Z again. Now what we want to try to do is fix the worst of the recorded notes. You can see this G3 is quite a long way out, and I do want to move that a little bit closer to the beat bar, but I want to maintain some humanity, some individuality in this performance, so I don't want to snap everything exactly to the quantization grid line. There's a couple of different ways that I can do that. The first one is to engage soft quantizing. The symbol in the editor is the angled brackets separated by the slash symbol. Let's turn that on. And now, even though I kind of turn it on and off from the editor, you also have access to it from the left-hand inspector panel. So here's soft quantize that's just being engaged. You see that those two functions are linked. They're basically doing exactly the same job. But in the inspector, we have access to the quantization strength, and it's currently set to 70%. This means that when I press quantization now, all of these notes will be moved 70% towards the quantization grid, not exactly there. Obviously, the further away the note is, the more it's going to jump. Let's try that. So now this note that was quite a long way away from the beat line is pretty close, and the stuff that was very close is just even closer. I have soft quantize engaged almost all the time. I think this is the default way to use quantization. There are occasions, particularly when performing logical edits, which is kind of like mathematical algorithms that you can apply to the notes. There are some times when you want notes to be exactly on a beat or a quantization grid. I'll disable soft quantization in those occasions, but generally speaking, this is my default process. 1/16 will almost always do you about right, because that's typically the fastest, certainly that I play, and the soft quantization on will work as well. Having said that, I'm going to turn it off again, and I'm going to hard quantize this time. Press Q. The second way that we can introduce some randomness is to use a feature called rough quantization, and this is again in the left-hand inspector panel. See down at the bottom of these options, we have a feature called rough quantize. What this allows me to do is perform a randomization on the quantizing, so rather than them being absolutely exact on the beat, there'll be a certain number of ticks away from the beat. Remember when we saw earlier how small ticks are? There's 120 of them in a single 16th. So 1/16, which is where I'm kind of drawing with my mouse at the moment, contains 120 ticks. You can set this value quite high. Let's set it to 6. And now when I quantize, watch this very closely, and you'll see all of the notes very slightly shift. If I press Q often enough, you'll also see this note turn white every now and again. I'll explain that in a minute. Oh, it happened straight away this time. So each time I press Q, you can hear me tapping the key on my keyboard. All of these notes are just jiggling around, and sometimes this note turns white. It's because it's being quantized past the start of the MIDI part. If we click on this note and have a look at its start value, you can see that it's 4 ticks away. There's 120 ticks in a 16th. It's 4 ticks away from the start of the MIDI part. And so if you engage rough quantizing, the way that I do this, generally speaking, and I do use rough quantize, is that I'll simply press Q often enough that this note is always inside the part. And it's just a really simple fix. But what you get there is a slight humanization, a slight randomness of all of the notes. Now, if I play this part back now, you might not even be able to recognize it, but it is kind of subliminally significant. This stuff stacks up. Let's have a listen to it. Like I say, it's very, very subtle. That's the reason why I set this ticks value so small. I don't want to hear inaccuracies in the sound, but I also don't want to feel like it's a robotic pulse just, driving these things out on this absolute grid. Now, I use rough quantize so often that I've actually defined my own custom preset for it. We're going to head into the quantization panel to see this. Press the Open Quantize Panel button. To a large extent, the functions in this panel are identical to those in the inspector. You very rarely need to open this thing, but one of the functions that we can perform in the Quantize panel is to save our Quantize presets. I'm going to drop this little box down, and down at the bottom of my presets you can see 1/16 R-6. That's a custom preset that I've defined that basically captures exactly these settings, and it's incredibly simple to do. All you do is set your rough quantize up at 6, head into your quantize panel and click the little save preset button, and here's the preset at the bottom of the list. Really nice idea to do this and bake it into your default preset. If you can save this as part of your standard Cubase setup, then you're going to get this like shortcut to the rough feature every time, and you're not going to have to manually increase this 6 ticks option all the time. It's just worth mentioning this isn't a universal option. If I select any of the other quantization options, if I set 1/16, you can see that rough returns back to 0. It's baked into that single preset. I'm just going to turn auto quantize back off again because I don't need that. The next thing for us to talk about is triplets and dots. You can see that almost 2/3 of the options in this panel are triplets and dots. Let's engage 16th triplet and watch what happens to the grid behind the scenes. We get more lines now, and if we count a single beat, you can see that there are 6 grid lines inside a single beat, as opposed to 4. So what we're saying there effectively is that the number of quantization zones that we used to have has just gone up by 1.5, a ratio of 3:2, and that's exactly what triplets do. They squeeze 3 notes into the space of 2. Now, triplet time has a very distinct feeling to it, and if you record something in triplet time, a standard 16th quantization grid is just not going to do the job. I'll record something in triplet time now, and we'll have a look at it, and then consider our options. Once I turn the metronome on. See how accurate that was? Probably not bad, actually. If I press Q, all of those notes should snap to the triplet lines. Yay me. Let's have a listen to that. So there's a very distinct, very different feeling to it. If you're recording a piece of music and you use triplets, you need to know that you're using triplets, because if you quantize to 16ths, it's going to sound horrible. Let's undo that quantization operation. Head back to straight time 16ths. Can you see how far away these notes are? This is not going to sound good. Yeah, we can immediately see. That's not what I wanted to do at all. What this means in practical terms is that it's quite rare that you can select a large piece. You might record like a 16-bar melody and get away with quantizing the entire thing in one go. That's just not how the world works. You're basically going to need to select the areas of the piece, the performance that are able to be quantized, and then it will work. So let's kind of mix those two things together and we'll have a look at that. I'm not sure if that was accurate enough, we'll find out in a moment. So the first bar was recorded in straight time. So I engage 16th straight, press Q. The second section, the second phrase, was recorded in triplet time. Engage 16 triplet, select those notes. So basically the selected notes are the ones that will get quantized. If you don't have any notes selected, it'll quantize the entire MIDI part. And looks like I got it right. Let's have a listen. Yeah, just this final note to be fixed. Select it, press Q, and that's that good. If you're on the beat, Quantize doesn't care because 16th and 16 triplet tie up at that point. So it's all very well and good fitting 3 notes inside 2, but you've still got the same start position, so they both work perfectly well. Now I can pretty much stop there because the number of times that you use dotted quantize is going to be very low. I would say over 99% of all of the music I've ever recorded uses either straight time or triplet time. Well, there's one final option, which I'm going to mention to you today, but again, it's just dipping into a slightly more advanced subject, and that's the concept of swing. Let's get rid of this MIDI part, and we're going to record a new one. But this time, I'm going to try and get my blues on, and I'm going to try to record something in swing time. I'm not a particularly good pianist, so this might take me a couple of goes. Here we go. The thing with swing time is that some notes are longer than others. In the world of swing, all notes are not made equal. The idea is that you kind of conceptually tie 2 notes together. Consider these first 2 notes. The first note is longer than the second note, so it basically exists in a larger scale of time. That's what swing is. Some notes are longer than others. It's a kind of really bizarre concept, but it's absolutely true. So I can see visually that that was played reasonably accurately. That swing time is not bad. And when you listen to it, it does have that kind of rolling gait of a blues riff. But if I try to quantize in 16th time, it's going to go horribly wrong. Those notes have been moved way too far. Undo it again. Because you can see this second note that I've just highlighted is nowhere near any of the quantization lines, and neither straight time nor triplet time really account properly for swing because it's not a strict subdivision. It fits somewhere in between in this strange kind of grey zone that the blues and swing both occupy. Now Cubase has facilities for dealing with this as well. As I said, we're just dipping a little bit into the more advanced stuff here, but there is a quantized swing option that you can specify. The reason why it's slightly complicated is because your quantized grid takes a little bit kind of more of a deep understanding. If I was going to summarize it very quickly, I would say the quantization grid in swing time is twice the resolution. So if I set it to 32 and start increasing my swing value, now when I press quantize, you're going to see that most of these notes fall exactly where I want them to be. Let's have a listen to it. I can see there's one note that's gone wrong. This note, I'll move that manually. Wasn't quite played accurately enough. Oh, there's another one. Nothing is fixed. You can see how complex the grid behind the scenes, which is reflecting the current quantized state. This is the strange twilight zone that blues and swing exist in. None of the normal features of Cubase or quantization are going to get you here, but this is a way to do it. So those 3 non-strict measurements that I've talked about today, soft quantizing, rough quantizing, and swing quantizing, are the 3 that I use most often. They are genuinely common operations that I perform when I'm recording music, because you don't want everything to be on this absolutely fixed metronomic beat, unless you're writing something like EDM, in which case it's absolutely fine. You want that kind of completely banging rhythm. Generally speaking, you don't. And some combination of all of those features, and very often multiple of them simultaneously, allow us to get to the point where we have a human feeling performance. Hope you enjoyed this video today. Please hit like if you did. I'll see you for the next one. Thanks very much.